Hello again. I am Bucky Beach. I'm the pastor at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church and Lutheran Campus Ministry in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right up here in the tip. This is the Upper Peninsula, and this is all of the rest of Michigan down here. Our readings this third Sunday in Advent include the appearance of one who is said to have walked out of the wilderness, John the Baptist, who, because of circumstance and necessity, is challenging the authorities of the day, is arguing with the priests and the Levites, who were sent by the Pharisees to challenge John for baptizing. Sort of an in-house issue our religious institutions still have. But in John's time, religion was the fabric of the day, woven together with comprehensive laws by which people lived. Religion encompassed everything. John is a good example of the arguments that we need to learn to have with today's authorities. Like John, we too are in the wilderness, and one of the ways to come out of it is to discuss and argue in civic and ethical terms about how our foundational and guiding institutions should function. How should they be woven together? Whether or not we emerge from the wilderness is yet to be determined. If we are followers of the Jesus John advocated, how should we act? How and what should we speak? What role does our discipleship play in our political and social institutions? I want to pursue a tangent path laid out in this week's psalm. For it too is about how we function as followers of Jesus who live in this world. Psalm 126, the New Revised Standard Version, says this: When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negev. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. The restoration that people cried out for comes not simply through a change of direction or a return to what was lost. This psalm sings of reversal. That is much more than a flipping of political parties or even compensation or reparation to those who had something taken from them, though that is a vital part of justice and righteousness. No, it's more than that. God's restoration suggests a radical reversal of reality, both past and yet to come. The opening verse recalls what might have been considered the most significant reversal in the mind of the community when the psalmist remembers the time when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, the return from exile. The psalmist recalls the effects it had upon the faithful. We were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. And the mouths that once ridiculed them at the beginning of the exile were now confessing that God has done great things for those who once suffered and died. People on both sides were rejoicing. But if we assume the context of this song is looking back after a return from exile, their joy and laughter is now in the past, and the community is left hoping that once again the Lord will do a great thing for them. To express what that might look like, the psalmist uses a simile. God's work of restoration is like a dry wadi or stream bed in the Negev desert region of southern Israel. For months on end, the wadis and streams remain wastelands where survival of any living thing is precarious, except during the rainy season when the stream beds become an oasis teeming with life. In a sudden movement, the sky opens up and the torrents of rain begin, and the wadi turns from a barren wasteland and bursts forth with life. That is what reversal looks like, and that is what community longs for. The psalm continues with another agricultural image, that of planting or sowing, suggesting that reversal and restoration, while miraculous in their own right, are not instantaneous. Those who sow without guarantee, but in anticipation of what will come. The psalmist prays that what began in tears and weeping will end with shouts of joy as bodies bend to the responsibility of working with the seeds of God's blessing in their midst. In today's terms, this is the healing hope of survival from cancer or COVID because of medicine developed by human creativity. It is the work of communities and individuals to build and revise the institutions that provide for our survival and our thriving. It is the nurturing of relationships with those with whom we have experienced alienation. It is the restoration of nature from the danger of climate change. That reversal is a mystical moment in which we understand there is no separation of creator from creation, and we exist in a holy moment, a recognition of and a union with all things. Last October 10th through the 12th, I was honored to take part in a 3-day, 90-mile People of the Heart water walk from Baraga, home of the Keweenaw Bay Ojibwa community on the shores of Lake Superior, to the very tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula, just past Copper Harbor. Those who walked with the sacred water, called Nibi, and the eagle staff that spiritually guides and protects the water walkers, were people of many colors and faiths, walking and working together for life's most precious resource, water. It is a 90-mile-long prayer or ceremony from the beginning of the day until each day's end. Walkers move like water, continuing each day until reaching the destination, Lake Superior, again. People carry asama or tobacco to offer to any flowing streams or rivers crossed, and honor any animals encountered along the way. Walking is a time for singing for the water and to the water, and praying to the Spirit for the water to be pure and clean and to continuously flow down to us. It is a time of great respect and honor of Creator who bestows the gift of creation to us, giving us the responsibility of caretaking. In Anishinaabe teaching, we walk to speak to the water spirits, to be in a healthy and healing relationship. And we walk not only for our ancestors, but for the generations to come. I'm reminded of our psalmist's plea to Yahweh to restore the fortunes of the people like the watercourses in the desert, giving thanks for what our Creator has done and promises for our future. Water is precious and sacred. It is also being threatened in our world today. The balance of all things is off. Our priorities have caused unhealthy living and consumption. Being attentive to the Spirit and the Creator reminds us that the exile that we are now experiencing need not define us. Advent is our time. When it's darkest, it's Advent. We are becoming aware and awake to the most obvious presence of the Creator around us, nature. But nature is also that of which we seem to be the most ignorant. Indigenous people have had a different understanding of nature all along. You can also think of the ancient philosophy of Taoism and ancient Chinese medicinal practices that are finally making sense to us, that acknowledge the energy paths within our minds and bodies and all of creation that makes us one. In a 1973 book titled The Secret Life of Plants, Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird claimed that plants had souls, that plants have emotions and even musical preferences, that they felt pain and physically absorbed the thoughts of other creatures, and that they could track the movement of the plants and predict earthquakes. In 1974, Peter Tompkins was on the Johnny Carson show. I'd love to find a recording of it to watch again, but I can't. So if you have one, please let me know. He was on the Johnny Carson show, and he demonstrated with two of Johnny's plants when he hooked up electrodes to them, noting their fluctuating readouts on a polygraph when he threatened them with a scissors. The meter went wild, as did Carson, laughing in his shock, almost falling out of his chair. Plants have emotions and musical preferences? Come on. They may be rooted to the earth, but they are mute, more like passive aspects of the environment than they are agents within it. They exist somewhere between object and organism. Well, those were the thoughts of the day, and they still are, to many. Last week, there was an article in the New York Times called "The Social Life of Forests. Do Trees Communicate and Cooperate with One Another?" It appears that science is catching up with what the ancients have known all along. At Oregon State University and the University of British Columbia, where she now teaches, Suzanne Simard studies the very complicated science of how forests grow and how they become frail. Suspecting that the answers were buried in the soil, her years of research began to reveal what was happening underground, that trees and plants are connected to one another through fungal threads that link nearly every tree in a forest, even trees of different species. Carbon, water, nutrients, hormones, and alarm signals can pass from tree to tree through these subterranean circuits and conduits. These life foundational resources flow from the oldest and the biggest trees to the youngest and the smallest. Chemical alarm signals generated by one tree prepare nearby trees for danger. And seedlings severed from the forest's underground lifelines are much more likely to die than their networked counterparts. And if a tree is on the brink of death, it sometimes bequeaths a substantial share of its carbon to its neighbors. There is an entire network of communication going on around us. In Simard's forthcoming book called Finding the Mother Tree, she writes, "The forest is more than just a collection of trees. And maybe trees are more aware of us than we thought." That's great because the argument is happening. The status quo is being challenged. Since Darwin, biologists have stressed the perpetual contest among species, the struggle of each organism to survive and reproduce within a given population, and underlying it all, the single-minded ambitions of selfish genes. But some scientists advocate for a greater focus on cooperation over self-interest and on the properties of living systems rather than on their individual units. Even trees of different species help one another at their own expense, which is an extraordinary level of altruism that contradicts the core tenets of Darwinism that dominates our thinking, namely survival of the fittest. But research in the soil suggests a radical reversal to the human mind. Cooperation is central to evolution. How to survive is not what we thought. Some are arguing today that nature is a vast, ancient, and intricate society. There is conflict in a forest, but there's also negotiation, reciprocity, and perhaps even selflessness. The trees, understory plants, fungi, and microbes in a forest are so thoroughly connected, communicative, and dependent upon each other that some scientists have described them as superorganisms. And not just forests. This web exists on prairies and in grasslands, on tundras and deserts, wherever there is life on land. The soil of the earth, that from which we come and are made, is teeming with networks of a scale and complexity beyond our imagination. Reading again the two creation stories in Genesis, it must be God's imagining that causes it all to become. And it's all connected. Life depends on being and staying connected. And much of it is underground, in the dark. When it's darkest, it's Advent. In a TED Talk from 2016, Simard describes, to the discomfort of some scientists, a world of infinite biological pathways, species that are interdependent like yin and yang, and veteran trees that send messages of wisdom on to the next generation of seedlings. She calls the oldest, largest, and most interconnected trees in a forest mother trees, a phrase that is meant to evoke their capacity to nurture those around them, even when they aren't literally their parents. Now, part of our discomfort with her argument is using anthropomorphic language that gives human characteristics to non-humans. But hey, we've done it for centuries, even in our own scriptures, that describes God in human terms and in terms of nature. Another part of our discomfort today is giving nature equal standing with us. And part of it may also be how hard it is to humble ourselves before a teacher that is just as great or greater than we are. So for the flat-footed among us, we can just stick to simile and metaphor, and maybe that will be enough to at least tweak our imaginations a little bit. But in nature's way, according to scientist Suzanne Simard, a forest behaves as though it is a single organism. Wisdom we need to learn. Everything is connected. Absolutely everything. In the ground and in the heavens. The tree of life is our connection with God, both metaphorical and literal. The tree of life may be a painting on your wall. It is also the tree outside in your yard. It is the forest all around you. It is the waters of Lake Superior and all the tributaries that feed it. It is the Spirit. It is Jesus who comes to us in our times of darkness, bringing life. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the desert. When it's darkest, it's Advent. It's more than a metaphor. It's life. Thank you. May your Advent be peaceful.